Imagine a world without armies. No tanks, no missiles, no battlefields, no soldiers marching under flags. For most of human history, none of these things existed. So how did we go from small groups of humans simply trying to survive to organized societies capable of fighting wars involving thousands and eventually millions of people? The strange truth is this: humans didn't suddenly invent war. War evolved gradually, alongside farming, population growth, competition for resources, and the rise of powerful societies. But where did it begin? And why did humans start fighting each other on such a large scale? Let's go back to the beginning. Hundreds of thousands of years ago, humans lived mostly in small communities. They hunted animals, gathered plants, moved from place to place, and depended heavily on cooperation. There was no concept of a modern country, no borders, no professional armies, no presidents or kings ordering people into battle. But that doesn't mean early humans never fought. Conflicts could happen between individuals or small groups over food, territory, relationships, or other resources. However, there's an important difference between violence and war. A fight between two people isn't a war. War generally involves organized groups repeatedly fighting against another organized group. And that required something humanity didn't have in large amounts at first: resources that could be controlled. Around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, something enormous changed. Humans began developing agriculture. Instead of constantly moving in search of food, many communities began growing crops and raising animals. This changed almost everything. People settled in permanent villages. Food could be stored, population increased, and land suddenly became extremely valuable. Imagine two neighboring communities. One has fertile farmland. The other wants access to that land. Now there's something worth fighting over. And unlike a temporary hunting camp, a farming settlement could contain houses, crops, animals, stored food, and valuable territory. These things could be defended, and eventually, they could be captured. Archaeologists have discovered evidence suggesting organized violence existed thousands of years ago. One famous example is Jebel Sahaba, an ancient burial site in what is now Egypt. The remains of many people show evidence of injuries caused by weapons. Researchers believe the violence may have involved repeated conflict between groups, but scientists still debate exactly how these events happened. And that's important. We shouldn't imagine that archaeologists have discovered a single moment when someone stood up and said, "Today, I invent war." There was no single inventor. War developed gradually. Thousands of years later, some settlements became much larger. Cities appeared. One of the most important regions was Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, agriculture supported growing populations. Cities became centers of trade, religion, government, and power. But larger societies also created new problems. Who controlled the farmland? Who controlled the water? Who collected taxes? Who controlled trade routes? And perhaps most importantly, who had the power to make everyone else obey? The answer increasingly became the state. Once governments became powerful enough, they could organize large groups of people. Instead of a few individuals defending their homes, rulers could gather soldiers into organized forces. Weapons could be produced, food could be collected, supplies could be transported, and soldiers could be trained. This transformed conflict. War was no longer simply a personal dispute. It could become a political tool. A ruler might attack a neighboring city to gain land. Another might fight to control trade. Another might try to expand an empire. And sometimes, leaders could use war to increase their own wealth and power. As civilizations became more advanced, warfare became more organized. Weapons improved. Fortifications became stronger. Armies became larger. Military strategies became more sophisticated. The ancient world saw powerful civilizations rise and fight for control. The Egyptians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, and many others developed increasingly complex military systems. The Roman Empire, for example, built one of history's most famous military organizations. Its armies could travel enormous distances, build roads and camps, construct fortifications, and coordinate large-scale campaigns. War had become something that required planning, logistics, technology, and administration. This is where the story becomes complicated. There isn't one simple reason humans fight wars. Different wars have different causes. Resources can be one factor. Land can be another. Political power, fear, revenge, religion, national identity, economic interests, and sometimes simple competition between leaders. But there's another important factor: fear itself. Imagine one kingdom becomes powerful. Its neighbors may become afraid. They might think, if we don't become stronger, they might attack us someday. So they build an army. Their neighbors see this army and become even more frightened. They build their own army. Now everyone is more heavily armed, even if nobody originally wanted a war. This is sometimes called a security dilemma, and it shows that war isn't always created by hatred. Sometimes, fear and mistrust can help create it. For thousands of years, humans continued improving their ability to fight. Bows became more effective. Metal weapons replaced many earlier tools. Cavalry changed battlefields. Gunpowder transformed warfare. Then came industrialization. Factories could produce weapons on a massive scale. Railways could move soldiers and supplies. Modern communications allowed governments to coordinate enormous operations. And eventually, humans developed weapons powerful enough to threaten entire cities. The technology of war had grown far beyond anything ancient humans could have imagined. The answer is more complicated than it first appears. Humans didn't invent war in one moment. There was no first general, no first battlefield we can point to with certainty, no single civilization that can be blamed for creating it. Instead, organized warfare appears to have emerged gradually as human societies became larger, more settled, and more politically complex. When humans began controlling land, food, animals, trade, and resources, there was suddenly more to gain and more to lose. And when governments gained the ability to organize thousands of people, conflict could become war. But perhaps the most important question isn't, who invented war? It's, why haven't humans invented a way to live without it? For thousands of years, humans have created weapons. But we've also created diplomacy, treaties, international organizations, peace agreements, and systems designed to prevent conflicts from becoming wars. The same species capable of incredible destruction is also capable of cooperation on an enormous scale. Humans built cities, connected continents, explored space, created science, medicine, music, and art. So perhaps the history of humanity isn't simply the history of war. It's the history of a species constantly facing the same challenge. How do we live together when we don't always agree? Because war may not have had a single inventor. But peace doesn't have a single inventor either. It's something humanity has to keep building, generation after generation. And perhaps that is the real story of human history.